The shrapnel tears into his face. His front teeth shatter. Calvin Graham falls 3 decks through twisted metal, his 12-year-old body slamming against steel. Above him, the USS South Dakota burns. Japanese shells pound the battleship. Men scream, and this kid, barely 5 feet tall, pulls himself up and starts dragging wounded sailors to safety. He shouldn't be here. He's supposed to be in 7th grade. Instead, he's fighting one of the bloodiest naval battles in World War II. And when the Navy discovers his secret, they'll throw him in prison and strip away every medal he earned. This is the true story of Calvin Leon Graham, America's youngest World War II veteran. The boy who lied his way into hell, and who spent 50 years fighting for the recognition he deserved. Canton, Texas, 1941. Calvin Graham is 11 years old and he's already planning his escape. His father is dead. His stepfather has fists that speak louder than words. By age 11, Calvin and his older brother have moved into a cheap Houston boarding house, selling newspapers and delivering telegrams to survive. Then December 7th happens. Pearl Harbor burns on newsreel screens. Calvin watches those ships sink and something clicks. This is his way out. He starts shaving at 11. There's barely any hair, but he does it anyway. He practices deepening his voice, studies how older boys walk, borrows his brother's clothes. At 5'2" and 125 pounds, the clothes hang loose on his skinny frame. August 15, 1942. Calvin walks into a Navy recruitment office in Houston. He's 12 years old. He has forged papers claiming he's 17. His voice cracks when he's nervous. The recruiter looks him over. "You're a kind of small kid." Calvin keeps his voice steady. "I'm 17, sir." Then comes the dentist. The man examines Calvin's mouth and pauses. Baby teeth. The jig should be up. But the dentist has seen 100 kids like this. 14, 15, 16-year-olds all claiming to be 17. The war needs bodies. He doesn't have time for this. "Go ahead," he says. Just like that, Calvin Graham becomes the youngest American to join World War II. 6 weeks of boot camp in San Diego. The instructors know some recruits are underage. They make them run extra laps. Nobody asks questions. October 1942. Seaman Calvin Graham boards the USS South Dakota at Pearl Harbor. He's assigned as a loader for a 40mm anti-aircraft gun. He turns 13 aboard the ship. The South Dakota isn't just any battleship. The Japanese think they've sunk it. The Navy lets them keep believing. The ship operates in secret, stripped of identifying markings. Newspapers call it Battleship X. Calvin makes a friend, Marine Henry Bucher. One day, Calvin confides, "Can you keep a secret? I'm 15. Bucher believes him. He won't learn the truth for 35 years. October 26, 1942. Battle of Santa Cruz Islands. Calvin sees combat for the first time. Japanese bombers swarm the fleet protecting the carrier Enterprise. The South Dakota's anti-aircraft guns roar. They shoot down 26 enemy aircraft. The carrier Hornet isn't so lucky. It sinks beneath the waves. Calvin loads ammunition. His hands shake but keep moving. This is real. This is war. And he's a child in the middle of it. Then comes Guadalcanal. Night falls over the Solomon Islands. Task Force 64 steams south to hunt Japanese naval forces. The South Dakota pushes forward with the battleship Washington and 4 destroyers. The Japanese find them first. Shells scream through darkness. Within minutes, American destroyers are sinking or burning. The South Dakota encounters 8 Japanese destroyers and sets 3 ablaze with its 16-inch guns. Then enemy searchlights lock onto the South Dakota. Japanese fire strikes the ship 42 times. Power fails. Fires erupt. Over 100 men are killed or wounded. Calvin is at his gun station when it happens. The blast throws him backward. Shrapnel tears through his jaw and mouth, knocking out his front teeth. He falls through 3 decks of superstructure, his small body broken and bleeding. Most men would stay down. Calvin gets up. He pulls wounded sailors to safety, makes tourniquets from dead men's belts. Blood pours from his face. His mouth is a wreck. He's 12 years old and he keeps working. Later, he'll say, "I took belts off the dead and made tourniquets for the living and gave them cigarettes and encouraged them all night. It was a long night. It aged me. The South Dakota survives. Barely." Calvin Graham earns the Bronze Star for valor and the Purple Heart for his wounds. December 18, 1942. The South Dakota limps back to Brooklyn Navy Yard for repairs. Newsreel footage plays in theaters across America. In Crockett, Texas, Calvin's mother sits in a dark theater. She sees footage of American sailors in the Pacific. And there on that screen, her son, her 12-year-old son, the one who told her he was visiting relatives. She contacts the Navy immediately. Calvin gets permission to attend his grandmother's funeral in Texas. He arrives a day late. When he reports to a naval base as ordered, expecting to explain and return to his ship, they arrest him instead. 3 months in the brig at Corpus Christi Naval Station. His medals, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, revoked. His sister threatens to go to the press. They release him. April 1st, 1943. The Navy gives him a dishonorable discharge. He's 13 years old, a decorated war hero, treated like a deserter. The gunnery officer who handled his case, a young ensign named Sergeant Shriver, who would later become vice presidential candidate and founder of the Peace Corps. Calvin returns to Houston. He tries returning to school, but he's too far behind. He drops out. At 14, he works as a shipyard welder. At 14, he marries. At 15, he becomes a father. At 17, now legally old enough, he enlists in the Marine Corps, makes corporal, serves until 1951 when he falls from a pier and breaks his back. For decades, Calvin fights for recognition. In 1978, watching Vietnam War deserters receive pardons, he says, "I deserved more than a deserter did." That year, President Jimmy Carter grants him an honorable discharge. All his medals are restored except the Purple Heart. That one stays revoked. In 1988, NBC makes a TV movie about his story, Too Young the Hero, starring Ricky Schroder. President Ronald Reagan signs legislation granting Graham disability benefits and back pay. But the Purple Heart remains out of reach. November 6, 1992. Calvin Graham dies of heart failure in Fort Worth. He's 62 years old. Before dying, he tells his nephew, "Maybe they'll give me my Purple Heart after I'm gone." He's right. June 21, 1994. 2 years after his death, Secretary of the Navy John Dalton presents the Purple Heart to Calvin's widow, Mary Graham, in Arlington, Texas. The medal he'd been denied for over 50 years. Calvin Graham wasn't alone. Historians estimate 200,000 underage boys enlisted during World War II. Most were 15 or 16. Some, like Calvin, were even younger. The youngest confirmed was 12 years old. They fought at Normandy, Iwo Jima, Guadalcanal. They flew bombers over Germany. They served on submarines in the Pacific. Many died before they were old enough to vote. Most never came forward. They feared losing their benefits or facing discharge. It wasn't until 1991 that the military began documenting these baby vets. Over 1,200 confirmed cases. Calvin Graham's story isn't about a boy who lied. It's about what happens when a nation asks children to fight its wars, and then punishes them for answering the call. The Navy threw him in prison for 3 months, stripped his medals, gave him a dishonorable discharge, made him spend 50 years fighting for recognition. He never got to see his Purple Heart reinstated. He died knowing the Navy still considered him unworthy of that final honor. But his story survived him. It reminds us that heroism doesn't have an age requirement, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to accept that you're too young, too small, or too unqualified to make a difference. Calvin Graham was 12 years old when he pulled wounded men to safety under enemy fire. He was 13 when his government threw him in prison for it. He was 62 when he died, still fighting. And he was always a hero, whether the Navy wanted to admit it or not. If you're fascinated by untold stories of World War II, subscribe for more forgotten chapters of history. Drop a comment telling us which story you want to hear next. These are the people who changed the world, and history almost forgot them.